The rain had been falling for hours, the kind of relentless, drumming rain that turns streets into rivers and makes the world feel smaller, more suffocating. In the small town of Ashwood, Missouri, the storm had driven nearly everyone indoors, leaving streets deserted except for the occasional headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The smell of wet asphalt and the earthy tang of soaked soil hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. It was the kind of night that made even the most rational person tense, as if the storm itself carried an unspoken threat. Jared Collins was driving home from his late shift at the diner on the edge of town. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly in the distance as he pulled onto Route 42, the wipers struggling to keep up with the torrential rain. His old sedan creaked under the strain, and the headlights barely penetrated the thick wall of rain. Jared liked the night shift because it was quiet, predictable, and kept him away from people he didn't want to deal with. But tonight, the quiet had a weight to it that made him uneasy. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to move. Every reflection in the puddles looked like something watching him. About 20 minutes into the drive, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but the rain made it impossible to see clearly. Jared slowed down, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. The figure didn't wave, didn't make any motion to signal him, just stood there, soaked and still. Against his better judgment, he stopped the car a few feet away. "Hey, you need a ride?" he called, rolling the window down just slightly. The wind and rain instantly sprayed into the car, cold and relentless. The figure didn't answer. As Jared leaned closer, he noticed something odd. The figure was completely still, almost unnaturally so, and the hood of the soaked jacket obscured the face entirely. A chill ran down his spine, but he convinced himself it was just the rain. "You're really going to make me leave you out here?" he asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Still, no response. Something about the figure's posture made him instinctively press the car horn. When it didn't react, Jared's stomach dropped. He had been through plenty of late-night shifts, seen enough people in bad shape, but this was different. This felt deliberate. Against every instinct screaming at him to drive away, Jared unlocked the passenger door. The figure moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the car. He could barely make out the hands now, hanging unnaturally stiff at the sides. Jared swallowed hard, suddenly regretting stopping. But the figure was at the door now, and he couldn't just drive off. "Get in," he said, forcing a casual tone. The figure opened the door and slid inside silently, the wet jacket leaving streaks across the seat. Jared's pulse hammered in his ears as he adjusted the mirror, trying to see the face. The hood stayed low. The figure didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, staring straight ahead. "Where to?" Jared asked, attempting small talk, though the words sounded hollow even to him. Again, no response. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You're not going to talk, huh? That's fine, he muttered, trying to convince himself it wasn't a big deal. He resumed driving, the rain smearing everything outside, the wipers thrashing furiously. He kept glancing at the passenger, each look making him more uneasy. There was something wrong about the way the figure sat, something stiff and unnatural, as if it weren't alive in the same way he was. 10 minutes later, he finally asked, "Where do you live?" The hood moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but still no answer. Jared's stomach twisted. He'd been driving this road for years, and nothing about this felt right. His mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't want to talk. Maybe they were something else. He slowed down as the road curved near the old rail yard, a place he knew well. His gut screamed at him, the kind of instinct that made him turn around and get out of there immediately. But curiosity, that dangerous mix of fear and the need to understand, kept him driving. He noticed the figure's hood shift again, just enough to catch a glimpse of pale skin beneath, wet hair plastered to the forehead. It was a face that seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Jared's knuckles whitened on the wheel as a sudden idea hit him. "Are you following me? You're following me, aren't you?" The figure still said nothing. The silence was suffocating, and every thrum of the rain on the roof sounded like a heartbeat. The next moment, Jared felt the car shudder. The figure's hand was on the gear shift. He jerked the wheel instinctively, and the car fishtailed, hydroplaning across the slick road. Heart hammering, he fought to keep control. The figure's movements were too deliberate, too strong. Jared's mind screamed at him to fight, to get out of the car, but they were already sliding toward the ditch. With a sickening crunch, the car hit the embankment and skidded to a halt against a tree. Rain poured in through the broken windshield. Jared's ears rang. He tried to breathe, to think, but the figure was already leaning toward him, the hood falling back enough to reveal the face. It was a face he knew, one that should have been impossible. His childhood friend, Tommy Reed's. Tommy had disappeared from Ashwood over 10 years ago. No trace, no investigation, nothing. And yet, here he was, wet, pale, and impossibly silent, staring at Jared with hollow eyes. "Tommy," Jared whispered, shaking. His mind was collapsing under the weight of impossible reality. "This isn't real. You're gone." Tommy's lips moved, just slightly, but the sound that came out was not human, a rasping, gurgling whisper. "I've been waiting." Jared's stomach turned. He stumbled backward, trying to open the door, but it was stuck. The tree against the side had bent the frame. Panic surged. He heard the car door on the other side click open. Tommy, or whatever it was, stepped out. Movement was jerky, unnatural, like every step was forced. The rain had slowed slightly, but the world felt quieter now, more oppressive. Every instinct in Jared screamed to run, but the mud and the bent car trapped him. Tommy reached for him, hand cold, wet, and impossibly strong. Jared felt a sharp pain in his arm as fingers dug into him, dragging him toward the front of the car. He screamed, thrashing, trying to break free. And then he saw it, beyond the car in the shadowed tree line, figures. More of them, standing still, silent, their faces pale and hollow, watching. None moved toward him, but their presence pressed down like a physical weight. The sound of the rain seemed to vanish, leaving only the rasping whisper of Tommy. "You can't leave." Jared fought harder, managing to free one arm and scramble out of the passenger side. He hit the muddy ground, sliding and falling. The cold seeped through him instantly. Tommy grabbed for him, and in that moment, Jared felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness, a deep, unnatural corruption in the air around him. He ran blindly into the trees, slipping over roots and mud. Behind him, he could hear movement, soft, deliberate, not like someone running, but like someone stalking, patient and inevitable. The rain started again, lighter, almost teasing, but the figures never faltered. He came across an abandoned shack, its wood rotted and sagging. Desperation drove him inside. Darkness swallowed him, but it was safer, at least temporarily. He huddled in a corner, listening. The sound of the figures outside, the slow, wet crunch of mud underfoot made his skin crawl. They were circling, waiting. Hours seemed to pass. Rain hammered the roof and walls, but inside it was quiet, except for the occasional scraping of wood or the rustle of wet leaves. Jared's mind tried to make sense, tried to remember what had happened before Tommy appeared. He thought of the diner, of the road, of the small town he had known all his life. None of it made sense now. None of it felt real. Suddenly, a loud crash outside made him jerk upright. The door of the shack burst open, ripped from its hinges as if by some immense force. The figures were there, but not moving, just standing. Jared's chest heaved, terror rooting him in place. He could hear Tommy's rasping whisper again, closer this time, everywhere at once. "You can't leave." Jared ran, darting past the figures, the trees bending unnaturally as he passed, almost guiding him toward the old bridge over Ash Creek. The bridge was narrow, slick, and old. The water below roared as the rain had swollen it into a dark, angry torrent. He had no choice but to cross it. As he ran, he could feel them behind him, closing in with each step, the hollow eyes burning into the back of his mind. Halfway across, he stumbled. The wood cracked under his weight. Panic turned to raw, animal fear. Jared scrambled forward, heart pounding, mind screaming, limbs numb with terror. He made it across barely and didn't stop running until he hit the main road leading into town. By the time he reached his apartment, drenched and shaking, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. He locked the door, leaned against it, and tried to breathe. He thought it was over, that he had escaped. Then he heard it, a soft tapping at the window. Slow, deliberate. He looked. At the balcony across from his apartment, a figure stood, soaked, hood low, eyes hollow and unblinking. Jared's world collapsed. The tapping continued, rhythmic, insistent, like a heartbeat, and then a whisper, unmistakable. "I've been waiting." Story the end. It had been raining all afternoon. a relentless drizzle that blurred the edges of the small Midwestern town and soaked the streets in a sheen of dark water. Cars splashed through puddles as the wind whipped around corners, and the streetlights flickered like they were struggling to keep the darkness at bay. Sarah tightened her coat around herself as she hurried along the narrow sidewalk, her umbrella doing little against the sideways rain. She hated nights like this, when the world felt compressed and every sound seemed magnified. The squelch of boots on wet pavement, the hiss of tires over asphalt, the lonely groan of distant traffic. Her apartment was only a few blocks away, but the weather made it feel like 100. She passed the old auto shop, the one with broken windows and rusting signage, and shivered. It had been abandoned for years, yet somehow it always looked like it was waiting for something. Every puddle reflected a distorted version of it, and in one, Sarah thought she saw a figure moving behind the broken glass. She stopped, squinting, her heart quickening, but nothing stirred. Just the rain, just her imagination, she told herself. She forced her legs to move, faster, nearly slipping on the slick sidewalk as a gust of wind nearly tore her umbrella from her hands. The streetlight above her flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the sidewalk ahead, and Sarah felt a familiar chill, not from the rain, but from something else, something waiting in the shadows. She turned quickly, scanning the wet street, but saw only empty buildings and puddled asphalt. She considered calling someone, her boyfriend, a friend, but the rational part of her knew it was ridiculous. She was safe. She was alone, but safe. And yet every instinct she had screamed at her that she wasn't. When she finally reached her apartment building, she found the door slightly ajar. That didn't make sense. She was meticulous about locking it behind her, and the building had a buzzer system she never forgot to engage. Her pulse sped. Tentatively, she pushed the door open and stepped into the dim, musty hallway. The smell hit her first. Damp carpet mixed with something sour, metallic. She froze, straining to hear anything over the rain dripping from her coat and the pounding of her heart. A low creak echoed from the stairwell above her. "Hello?" she called, her voice cracking. Only the drip of water answered. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her wet shoes squeaking on the steps. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, and by the time she reached it, the storm outside had intensified. Rain pounded against the windows like a drum, and the wind rattled the frame of her apartment door. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking, and finally slipped the key into the lock. She swung the door open. The apartment was dark, too dark. Her apartment was usually cozy, the warm glow of her lamp spilling onto the living room walls. Now it was almost pitch black, shadows pooling in corners. Sarah's stomach knotted. She flipped the switch, but the light flickered once and went out. She cursed under her breath and stumbled toward the kitchen, where a flashlight sat in a drawer. She clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. Everything seemed normal at first. Her apartment was in disarray, but that was nothing unusual. She'd been busy lately, hadn't had time to clean. Then she saw it, a smear of something dark across the hallway carpet. She crouched, shining the light closer, and her stomach lurched. It was blood. Fresh. She didn't know from what, and she didn't want to. Her mind raced. Had someone broken in? She tried the door to her bedroom. It was locked. She hadn't locked it. Panic clawed at her chest. She backed into the living room, scanning the apartment with the flashlight. Then she heard it, a soft, dragging sound from behind her. She whipped around, and the light caught a figure at the far end of the room. A man, tall, soaked from the rain, standing in the shadow of her sofa. His face was obscured by a hood, and he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Sarah froze, unsure what to do. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her body refused. The man took a slow step forward. The dragging sound grew louder. It was coming from the hallway, from her bedroom, the locked door. Sarah's breath caught. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers slipping on the wet surface of the flashlight, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the line. There's someone in my apartment, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Please, send someone. He's in here. There was a pause, then, stay on the line. Where are you exactly? She gave the address, her eyes never leaving the man who had moved closer, the hood still hiding his face. Then he did something that made her blood run cold. He lifted a hand slowly, as if pointing at her. a wet, glistening finger dripping with something dark, and then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a wide, unnatural smile, one that made her feel like the air had been sucked out of the room. She pressed herself against the wall, shaking, and whispered, "He's smiling. He's smiling." "Stay calm," the operator said. "Help is on the way. Can you get to a room and lock yourself in?" Sarah backed toward the bedroom, her mind racing. She didn't know why, but she instinctively reached for the door handle. It wasn't locked anymore. She gasped, and before she could react, the man lunged. She screamed, stumbling into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. The lock clicked, barely holding, but the man began pounding on the door. Heavy, methodical, like he knew exactly how much force it would take to break through. Sarah pressed herself against the door, shaking, tears mixing with the rain still clinging to her hair. The dragging sound from earlier was now inside the room, and she realized with a sickening clarity it was coming from under her bed. The room felt colder suddenly, as if the rain outside had seeped through the walls. She shined the flashlight under the bed. Something moved. A shadow. Not the man. Something smaller. Something writhing. She screamed again, a raw animal sound, and stumbled back into the closet. Her phone slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, but she managed to keep the line open with the operator. There's something under my bed," she stammered. "It's not him. Something else." "Stay calm, ma'am. Help is coming. Just stay in there. Can you barricade the door?" She grabbed a chair and shoved it against the door, but it felt useless, flimsy. The pounding outside intensified, each blow making the walls tremble. Then the dragging sound stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. She held her breath. Then came a whisper. "Sarah." Her blood froze. She hadn't said her name out loud. She looked around the closet, shining the light in every direction. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Sarah." She realized it was coming from under the bed. Her stomach turned. She wanted to look, but fear rooted her to the spot. Then a hand shot out from under the bed, pale, slick, and grabbed her ankle. She screamed, kicking wildly, but the grip was strong. She felt herself being pulled toward the floor. Her flashlight rolled under the bed, illuminating a face, pale, wet, and grinning, eyes wide and unblinking. Sarah scrambled, finally tearing free and bolting toward the door, slamming her shoulder against it. The door shuddered but held. The pounding stopped. Silence again. She didn't know if the man had left or if he was waiting for her somewhere else in the apartment. The dragging noise remained under the bed, subtle but persistent, like it had never stopped. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. The rain continued, a constant drumbeat on the roof. Sarah sat against the wall, crying, listening to her own ragged breathing. Then she heard the sirens. Her relief was immediate, but mixed with terror. She ran to the door, shouting, but the pounding started again. Louder this time, desperate, furious. "Sarah!" The whispering came again, closer. Not one voice, many. A chorus of wet, rasping voices. "Sarah!" She grabbed a kitchen knife, shaking, and moved toward the bedroom, ready to confront whatever had been under the bed. She threw open the door and shone the flashlight in the room. Nothing. Just the rain-soaked floor and her scattered belongings. Relief and dread warred in her chest. Then she saw it. On the bedroom wall, words written in dark, dripping letters. "You can't hide. We're inside." Her scream was cut short by the sound of the front door splintering. The flashlight flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room, the apartment, and the pounding rain outside. The last thing she heard was the whispering, close, too close, 1,000 voices murmuring her name. When the neighbors heard the sirens and stormed into the building, the apartment was empty. No sign of Sarah. Just the chair still lying across the closet door, the knife on the floor, and the wet, unbroken silence of the storm. Outside, the rain continued to fall, relentless, as if nothing had happened. Days later, police found footprints in the apartment, wet, smeared with blood. They led to the street, vanished into the puddles, and then disappeared. No other traces. No witnesses. No clues. Just an apartment left in eerie disarray and the rain that never seemed to stop, as though the storm itself was keeping a secret. People in the building moved out soon after. Others whispered that the auto shop across the street had always been cursed, that the man who used to live in Sarah's apartment had vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances. But the truth, as always, was stranger than the stories. Some nights, when the rain is heavy and the wind howls through broken windows, neighbors claim they hear footsteps in the apartment, dragging and scraping, and a chorus of voices calling a name, her name. The building still stands, though it's empty now, shuttered, waiting. People avoid it, especially on stormy nights. But if you look through the cracks in the windows, past the dark and the damp, you might see a figure standing in the corner of the living room, smiling, waiting, always waiting. And sometimes, if the wind is right, you can hear the whispers under the floorboards, calling out for anyone foolish enough to listen. No one who has been inside since has stayed the night. Some say they felt cold hands brush their ankles while they slept. Others say they saw faces staring from under the bed. Everyone agrees on one thing. The apartment doesn't let you leave the same way you entered, and the rain never stops. They say Sarah's still out there somewhere, trapped between the storm and the shadows, hiding under a door that isn't locked, or maybe under a bed that's just too small to contain what she has become. The whispers call her, and she calls back, and the storm listens. No one has dared enter since, and the rain continues, endless, relentless, keeping the secret safe. Some nights, when it's heavy and dark, you can see movement in the windows, faint figures that vanish when you blink. You can hear dragging in the floors above, and if you stay very still, very quiet, you might hear a chorus of voices whispering your name. And if you hear them, it's already too late. Story the end. The rain had been relentless since mid-afternoon, turning the streets into slick mirrors reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. Caroline's old Honda struggled against the wind gusts as she drove along the nearly empty backroads of Vermont, the rhythmic thrum of the wipers a small comfort against the storm. She'd left Boston that morning, thinking the long drive home would clear her head. But now, trapped between the pounding rain and the dark, twisting road ahead, she wondered if the trip had been a mistake. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. She glanced at it, a message from an unknown number. "Are you alone?" It sent a shiver down her spine, but she shrugged it off, telling herself it was probably a wrong number. She ignored it and kept driving, the rain making everything outside look like a smudged watercolor. An hour later, her headlights caught the outline of a small gas station tucked into the corner of a dark intersection. The neon sign flickered, half-lit, casting an eerie glow over the puddles. She pulled in, grateful for a break, though unease prickled at her chest. Inside, the station was empty, except for an older man behind the counter, his eyes hollow, like he hadn't seen another human in days. "Coffee?" he rasped. She nodded and watched him prepare it silently. When she turned to leave, she noticed a wall of old photographs behind the counter. Most were black and white, faded to gray. Families, smiling, holding balloons, or standing on porches. But one picture stood out, a young woman sitting on a curb in the pouring rain, clutching her knees, staring straight at the camera. Caroline froze. The face looked exactly like hers. "Odd, isn't it?" The man's voice startled her. She jumped. "Looks just like someone I know." Yeah?" she stammered, suddenly anxious to leave. "I should get going." He nodded slowly. "Be careful on these roads tonight. Not everyone likes visitors." The words lingered in her mind as she returned to the car. The storm had intensified. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. She kept her speed low, heart pounding, glancing in the rearview mirror, certain she saw headlights following her intermittently, then vanishing when she blinked. A mile down the road, her car sputtered. The engine coughed and died. She cursed under her breath, slamming her hands on the steering wheel. Rain dripped through the edges of the broken window seals, soaking her clothes. She tried her phone, no signal. Of course. Classic Vermont backroad nightmare. Pulling over, she opened the hood, though she didn't know much about cars. Steam hissed from the radiator. The sound of approaching footsteps made her spin around. Nothing. Just the rain. Her chest tightened. She could feel it now, the kind of cold dread that seeps into your bones. Then she heard it. A whisper, soft but clear. "Caroline." She froze. The name wasn't in her phone. It wasn't anyone she'd told she was traveling alone. The whisper came again, closer this time. She turned in a circle, and for a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing by the tree line. A man in a long coat, dripping wet, staring at her. Panic surged. She slammed the hood down and jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. The car roared to life. She didn't care if it was a mechanical miracle. She floored it, tires spraying water in all directions. The road ahead seemed endless, winding through thick forests where the wind howled like voices in the trees. Lightning split the sky, illuminating twisted branches that looked like reaching hands. She tried to shake the thought of the man, or whatever it was, but every shadow seemed alive. Every puddle reflected something that wasn't her own reflection. Her headlights caught a small, decrepit cabin at the edge of the woods. The idea of seeking shelter seemed insane, but the storm was worse than anything she'd imagined. She parked haphazardly in front and ran to the door, shivering violently. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and decay. A fireplace lay cold, but the remnants of ashes hinted it had been used recently. On the floor, a single chair faced the door, and on that chair sat a figure, back turned, shoulders shaking as though in deep sobs. "Hello?" Caroline called, voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. She stepped closer. "Are you okay?" The figure slowly turned. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't a stranger. It was her, or at least an exact copy of her. Wet hair plastered to the face, clothes soaked through, pale and trembling. Caroline stumbled back. Who are you?" she whispered. The twin mirrored her, voice barely audible. "I've been waiting." Before she could respond, the sound of knocking came from the walls themselves, half rhythmic, insistent. Caroline's eyes darted around the small room. Windows rattled in their frames, though the wind had died down outside. The knocking grew louder, coming from behind her. She spun around, and the walls seemed to stretch, dark corners swallowing the light. Her twin stepped closer, reaching a hand out, and Caroline stumbled backward into a corner, heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" she screamed. "You should never have come alone," the twin said. "They don't like visitors." Suddenly the floorboards creaked. From beneath, a soft scratching noise began. Caroline froze, eyes wide as the boards lifted slightly, revealing dark, gaping holes. Shapes moved underneath, too many to count, clawing, writhing, whispering her name. The twin laughed softly, an eerie echo that seemed to reverberate from all corners of the cabin. "They know. They've always known." Caroline tried to run, but the door slammed shut before she could reach it. The windows went black, as if the storm outside had vanished completely, leaving her in a void. She pounded on the door, screaming, but the sound was swallowed instantly. The twin leaned in close, eyes reflecting something ancient, malevolent. "You're part of it now," it said, voice chilling. "You've always been part of it." Suddenly the floor beneath Caroline gave way. She screamed as she fell into darkness, landing hard on damp, cold earth. She tried to move, but the ground itself seemed alive, gripping her limbs, pulling her down. Shapes emerged from the mud, faces twisted in pain, bodies half submerged, hands reaching desperately. They whispered, groaned, and clawed at her, dragging her further into the blackness. A flicker of light appeared above her, a small, candle-like glow. She crawled toward it, bloodied and terrified. The glow revealed a narrow tunnel, carved crudely through the earth, walls lined with inscriptions she couldn't read. The whispers grew louder, chanting, echoing in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She stumbled forward, desperate to escape, but the voices followed. "Caroline, Caroline," they sang, a twisted lullaby. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, lit by dozens of flickering candles. And there, standing in the center, was her twin, arms raised, chanting along with the voices. "Join us," the twin intoned. "There is no leaving." Caroline screamed again, lunging toward the twin, only for her hands to pass through empty air. Her twin's face twisted into something unrecognizable, and the candles flickered violently, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. The shapes in the walls, the voices from the ground, and the chanting from the twin all merged into a deafening cacophony. Then, silence. Caroline opened her eyes. She was back in her car, rain dripping from the edges of the roof. The engine hummed steadily. The road stretched ahead, empty, silent. She blinked, heart racing. Was it real? A dream? She reached for her phone, and this time it had signal. A single message awaited. "See you next time." The rain continued to fall as she drove, never daring to look back, every shadow in the tree line whispering promises she didn't want to hear. The lights of a small town appeared in the distance, but Caroline knew, deep down, that the twin, the voices, and the shapes beneath the floorboards were waiting for the next stormy night, the next road less traveled, waiting for her. Every night afterward, she couldn't sleep. Every rainstorm made her phone buzz with messages from numbers she didn't know. Are you alone? We see you. It's your turn. Her reflection in mirrors seemed slightly off, too pale, too wet, eyes too hollow. And sometimes when she wasn't looking, she swore she could hear her twin's voice in the wind, whispering the same words as before. You should never have come alone. Caroline moved, tried to escape, but no matter where she went, the rain always found her first. The roads she took twisted strangely, looping back to the same forests and the same gas station. People noticed her unease, asked if she was all right, but she couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe that the storm carried shadows that watched, whispers that knew your name, and a twin waiting in the darkness for the moment you least expected it? Years passed, but the feeling never left. Every reflection, every raindrop, every creak in a quiet house reminded her of that night. She learned to sleep with lights on, doors locked, and cars parked facing the street. She avoided small towns, back roads, and anything that resembled isolation. But even that wasn't enough. The twin had left a mark on her, an invisible tether she couldn't cut, a promise she hadn't agreed to but had no choice but to honor. And sometimes, when the rain falls hardest and the night is at its darkest, Caroline swears she can see her twin standing just beyond the window, pale and wet, smiling that same hollow smile, whispering that she'll see her again. It's been 10 years, and she still drives that same back road in her nightmares. Rain hammering against the windshield, wipers flailing like frantic hands. The gas station is always there, flickering neon against the dark. The photographs still hang inside, and every time she finds one with her face staring back, older, more hollow, waiting. No one knows how she survived. Maybe she didn't, not really. Maybe what she lived through that night was only the beginning. The storm is always coming back, and with it, the twin waits, the whispers grow, and the shadows reach for anyone foolish enough to drive alone, too far from the safety of light. Caroline still answers the messages sometimes, though she knows it's a trap. Yes, she types once, and the reply comes instantly. Good. See you soon. Her fingers tremble, and the wind howls outside, carrying with it the sound of wet footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching her door. She hasn't slept since that night, hasn't truly felt safe. Every reflection, every shadow, every whisper reminds her she should never have come alone. And she knows the twin will always be there, waiting for the storm, waiting for her, waiting to finish what began that rainy night on a lonely road in Vermont where the rain doesn't just fall, it watches, it waits, and it remembers. Story the end. The rain started early that evening, drumming against the roof in a steady, relentless rhythm. By 6 o'clock, it had turned into a full-blown storm, the kind that drags everything outside into a blur of gray and darkness. I was driving home from work, a long shift at the diner that barely kept me afloat, down back roads that wound through thick pine forests and abandoned farms. The windshield wipers squeaked in protest, working furiously to keep up with the torrent. I had been alone on the road for what felt like hours, the yellow lines of the highway reflecting wet and distorted under the streetlights that flickered every few seconds. The air inside the car was cold, damp, and filled with the faint smell of wet leather and old coffee. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly as I tried to keep my focus, my mind wandering to the empty apartment I was heading to, a small third-floor studio that creaked in every storm. About 20 minutes from home, my car hit a slick patch and fishtailed slightly. I yanked the wheel and managed to keep control, but my heart was pounding. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, a trick of the water on the road. But no, she was real. Standing in the middle of the lane, drenched, hair plastered to her face and clothes, she wasn't moving much, just swaying slightly like she didn't know which way to go. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop a few feet away. My headlights caught her face, pale and wide-eyed, staring right at me. "Are you okay?" I shouted over the roar of the rain, my voice cracking. She didn't answer. She just blinked, slowly, unnervingly, and stepped closer. I could see that her clothes were torn, muddy, and soaked, sticking to her skin. Something about her presence made my stomach twist, a deep, instinctual sense that I was in danger. I fumbled to unlock the doors, but froze when she raised a hand, pointing at the forest beyond the road as if urging me to go somewhere else. "I don't think I can help you," I said, my voice shaking. I needed to get out of here, but I couldn't make myself drive past her. Something in her eyes held me there, rooted to the spot. Her lips moved slightly, but I couldn't hear her over the pounding rain. I felt a cold sweat break along my spine. Then she smiled. Not a friendly smile. Something twisted, cruel, like the kind of smile someone wears when they know a secret you desperately want to ignore. I slammed the car in reverse and fishtailed back a few feet, my heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. She didn't move, didn't follow, just stood there, watching. I drove off as fast as I could, trying to shake the image from my mind. My apartment building loomed ahead, a small block with peeling paint and flickering lights, the kind of place you notice when the storm makes everything else invisible. I parked and ran up the stairs, dripping wet, heart hammering. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But the unease didn't leave. I couldn't stop thinking about her and the way she'd pointed toward the woods. Something about it felt wrong. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from an unknown number. "You saw me." I dropped the phone. My stomach flipped. Who the hell was this? I grabbed it again and looked. There was nothing else, no sender ID, no reply option, just those words. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it a second time. I locked the screen and sat down, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was just too tired. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The storm worsened, hammering against the windows. I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, kind of staring at the ceiling as the wind made the old pipes groan. Around 3 a.m, I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging across the pavement outside my window. I froze. The footsteps paused, and then I felt it. Eyes on me. Not just looking, but studying, like a predator sizing up prey. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer and crept toward the window. Peering through the rain-streaked glass, I saw nothing at first. The storm was blinding. But then a shadow moved. She was there, standing on the sidewalk below, soaked and still, staring up at me. My grip on the knife tightened, knuckles white. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Hours passed like that. I didn't sleep. I didn't move, just watched. And then the shadows shifted. I thought I was imagining it, but no. There were more of them. Figures, pale, wet, lingering at the edge of my sight. They didn't approach all at once. Just waited. And I could feel their attention, a suffocating presence that made the room feel smaller, heavier, like the air itself was turning against me. The phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number. "You can't hide." My vision blurred as panic took over. I backed away from the window and pressed myself against the far wall. The sound of water hitting the roof was deafening, but beneath it, I could hear whispering. Low, urgent, like hundreds of voices speaking at once, all from just beyond the walls. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. Then came the scratching. At first, subtle, almost playful, but it grew louder, more insistent. Something was trying to get in, something wet, clawing against the frame of my apartment door. My knife felt useless. I realized I couldn't call anyone. My phone had gone dead, the battery dropping to 0 in seconds. It wasn't dying naturally. Something in the room was draining it. The scratching turned into pounding. I backed into the corner, knife raised, and prayed it would stop. But it didn't. The doorknob rattled violently like someone or something was trying to break through. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. I screamed for help, but the rain drowned my voice. And then, silence. I didn't breathe for a long time, listening to the storm, the rain, the distant rumble of thunder. The silence was worse than the noise. I inched toward the door, knife ready, and flung it open. The hallway was empty. Nothing. No footprints, no wet stains, no sign anyone had been there. I ran to the stairs and down to the lobby. The storm had softened to a drizzle, and the streets were empty. My car was gone. The headlights, the keys, I had left them in the ignition. Whoever it was, they had taken it. I called the police, but they couldn't do anything. No prints, no witnesses, nothing. Just my story in the storm-soaked street. I tried to sleep that night in a different apartment farther away, but the messages didn't stop. New numbers, unknown senders, texts that always said, "You saw me," or "I'm outside." Sometimes images, blurry and dark, always showing shadows moving just beyond my window, figures in the rain. Days turned into weeks. I started seeing her everywhere. the woman in the soaked clothes, pale and smiling. At the grocery store, in the reflection of the microwave, in the mist outside my car window. Sometimes she would just vanish when I looked again. People told me I was imagining things, that the storm had broken something in my mind. But I knew better. Then came the voicemail. No number, just a recording. My own voice, but distorted, saying things I hadn't said, describing moments I hadn't lived. My blood ran cold. They knew me. They were inside my life, my memories, waiting for the storm to return. A month later, I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing in my apartment. The room was dark, the storm raging outside, lightning illuminating shadows that danced across the walls. The door was wide open, and standing there just beyond the doorway was her, soaked, pale, smiling. And behind her, more figures, all watching, all waiting. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. One of them stepped forward, and I realized with horror that it wasn't just her. It was me, or something that looked like me, twisted and wet, smiling back at me. The storm's wind roared in my ears as I stumbled backward, my mind fracturing, reality blurring. I tried to close my eyes, tried to run, but the room stretched, the figures multiplying. They whispered my name, my fears, my secrets, all in voices that weren't mine, all pointing to the dark corners of the apartment. And then the rain came inside. Not through the windows, but from the ceiling, the walls, the very air. Cold water soaking me, dragging me down as their voices grew louder, screaming my own thoughts back at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My hands reached for something, anything, and touched only wet air and shadows. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the smile. That smile, twisted and knowing, coming closer, closer until it filled my vision, until it was all I could see. And then nothing. I woke up the next morning in the street, outside my apartment, drenched, alone, no memory of how I got there. My apartment was gone. Just an empty lot, mud and puddles, the storm long gone. My phone had messages I didn't recognize, numbers I didn't know, but one repeated over and over, "You can't hide." I left town that day, but the feeling didn't leave me. Every time it rains, I see shadows at the edge of my vision. Every time I close my eyes, I feel that presence. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I hear the softest whisper, just behind my ear, "You saw me." No one believes me, and I don't know if I want them to. Some things are real, and some things are waiting, in the rain, in the dark, in the spaces we think are empty. And I know one day I won't be able to escape. Story the end. The storm had been brewing for hours, an oppressive gray sky giving way to relentless rain that hammered against the asphalt and filled the air with the scent of wet earth and metal. The streets were empty, save for a few scattered cars, their windshield wipers flailing uselessly against the torrent. It was the kind of night that made the world feel smaller, the darkness pressing in from every angle, and the rain a constant drumbeat on rooftops and street signs. In the midst of it all, Eric drove slowly, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other tapping nervously on his thigh, eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. He had left work later than usual, caught up in a series of unexpected meetings, and the drive home had taken longer than anticipated. The office was in a small town just north of a larger city, and his apartment was on the outskirts, past the old industrial district, through a stretch of road lined with abandoned warehouses. He had always found that road unsettling even in daylight, and now, with rain reducing visibility to a few dozen feet and shadows stretching and bending along the wet pavement, it felt downright hostile. The first incident was subtle, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, something crossing the road just beyond his headlights, though when he looked directly, there was nothing. He chalked it up to the rain, to a trick of the light, maybe a stray animal. But then it happened again, only closer this time, at the edge of the lane. He swerved instinctively, heart hammering, and saw a figure, a man, or maybe a boy, he couldn't tell, standing at the side of the road. His coat was soaked, hair plastered to his face, but his eyes, black and hollow, met Eric's for a moment before he vanished into the rain. Eric shook his head, gripping the wheel tighter. He knew he shouldn't be thinking about ghosts, oaths, or urban legends, but the isolation of the road, the pounding rain, the emptiness, it was making his imagination run wild. He pressed the accelerator slightly, the car skidding on a slick patch of asphalt, and tried to focus on the turn ahead. That's when he saw the second figure, emerging from the shadows like it had been waiting for him. This one was different. Taller, broader, and moving unnaturally fast, almost gliding across the wet pavement. Eric slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, but the figure stopped just short of the headlights. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak, and then it lifted a hand in a gesture that was impossibly slow, deliberate, and terrifying. Eric's stomach churned and he floored the gas pedal, leaving the figure behind in a blur of rain and reflections. The industrial stretch ended and he turned onto a quieter residential road, thinking he was finally safe. But then his phone buzzed. No signal, just a blank, ominous screen flashing in the dim light of the dashboard. He ignored it and drove on, but the sense of being watched didn't leave him. The rain, which had been a steady drum, now seemed to have a rhythm, almost like footsteps following him, echoing on the pavement. He passed a small park, the kind with swings that squeaked in the wind, and for a split second, he thought he saw someone sitting on one of them. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, soaked through, staring at him with unblinking eyes. He blinked, and she was gone. Panic began to rise in his chest, a low, gnawing anxiety that wouldn't be quelled. By the time he reached the final stretch to his apartment, a narrow road lined with trees whose branches drooped under the weight of the rain, the darkness had become almost physical, pressing against the car like a living thing. His headlights illuminated glimpses of movement in the shadows, figures he couldn't identify, reflections that didn't match anything on the road. He considered pulling over, waiting out the storm, but the instinct to reach home was stronger. When he finally turned onto the street where his apartment building sat, he slowed to a crawl. The parking lot was empty, the streetlights flickering intermittently. That's when he saw it. A figure standing under a street lamp at the far end of the lot, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Eric froze. The figure's outline was vaguely human, but something about the way it moved or didn't move set his teeth on edge. He pressed the unlock button on the car remote and the figure began to move toward him. Not walking, not running, but gliding, unnervingly smooth. He unlocked the car door and dove inside, locking it immediately. Heart hammering, he grabbed the keys and started the engine, ready to drive into the building's garage. That's when the headlights revealed another figure, this one right behind the first, and another, all moving silently across the lot, circling him. Panic clawed at him. He tried to start the car, but the engine stalled. He turned the key again, and finally it roared to life. He hit the gas, tires spinning on wet asphalt, and aimed for the garage entrance. But just before he could reach it, the first figure shot up in front of the car, impossibly fast. Black eyes locked on him. He slammed on the brakes, sliding sideways, the hood of the car clipping the curb. The figure disappeared beneath the glare of the headlights. Eric exhaled shakily, realizing he had just avoided something he couldn't explain. Inside the garage, he parked and locked the doors, but the sense of unease didn't leave. He looked around, the concrete walls wet from leaks in the roof, the fluorescent lights flickering, casting long, jittering shadows. He noticed scratches on the wall near the exit, deep gouges that hadn't been there before, and a wet footprint that didn't match any shoe he owned. He ran up to his apartment, ignoring the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Keys shook in his hand as he reached the door. He unlocked it, bolted inside, and leaned against it, trying to steady his breathing. The rain outside pounded with relentless intensity. He told himself it was over. He was inside. Safe. Nothing could reach him here. But the apartment was silent in a way that felt wrong. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in normal life. There was a smell, faint but unmistakable, metallic, like blood mixed with rain. He glanced around, trying to shake off the panic, when he noticed the window. The living room window that looked out onto the parking lot. There, pressed against the glass, was a handprint. Wet. Large, human, but wrong. Elongated, fingers too long, stretching unnaturally. He stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the rug, and slammed the light switch. Nothing. Just the dim reflection of the window in the black glass. The handprint was gone. He laughed nervously, telling himself it was condensation, dirt, imagination. He tried to calm down, poured a drink, and sat on the couch, shaking. Hours passed. He checked the locks repeatedly. The sound of rain filled the apartment, relentless. And then he heard it, a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, deliberate, slow. His blood ran cold. He lived alone. There was no one who should be there. He crept to the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing, just the empty hallway, wet from the storm that had tracked in on everyone's shoes. He exhaled, telling himself to calm down. But then the knock came again, louder, closer, and followed by a whisper. "Let me in." He backed away, fumbling for his phone, only to realize there was still no signal. The whispers grew louder, coming from the door, from the walls, from the very air around him. He could hear them pacing, moving, always circling, always just out of sight. Then came the sound of footsteps inside the apartment. Slow, deliberate, wet, echoing on the hardwood floors. He spun, but the living room was empty. The bathroom door was closed. The bedroom door closed. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a wet, guttural sound, like someone breathing heavily, right behind him. He turned and froze. There, in the corner of the room, a figure stood, soaking wet, eyes black as coal, grin stretching impossibly wide. It tilted its head, cocking it unnaturally. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered. The voice was wet, dragging across his nerves. Eric ran, bolting for the bedroom, locking the door behind him. He called 911, shaking, drenched from sweat, heart racing. The operator picked up, but the line was full of static, and beneath the static he could hear whispers. Closer, pressing against his ears. "Let me in, let me in." He backed into the corner, shaking, trying to tell himself it was a nightmare, that it was impossible. But the window rattled as though something outside pressed against it. The door handle rattled, and then he heard it. A soft, wet, scraping sound moving across the hardwood floor toward him. Eric held his breath, trembling. The door creaked, a long, slow groan. A shadow appeared under the crack. He screamed. The next morning, the neighbors found the apartment door wide open, rainwater dripping across the hallway. The apartment was empty. No sign of Eric, no footprints, no struggle. Just the faint smell of rain and iron lingering in the air, and a single handprint smeared across the inside of the bedroom window, elongated and black, staring out at the street. No one ever saw him again. Those who lived in the building afterward claimed that on rainy nights you could hear footsteps pacing, whispers that followed you, and shadows that didn't belong to anything alive. And sometimes, just sometimes, a figure would appear in the window, soaking wet, black-eyed, grinning, watching, waiting. Story the end. The rain started around 6 in the evening, the kind that begins soft and polite, then escalates into a relentless sheet that pounds against rooftops, streets, and car hoods, as though trying to wash the world clean, or maybe drown it. In the small town of Millwood, Ohio, the storm brought everything to a halt. Streetlights flickered and struggled to illuminate the roads, slick with water, the occasional puddle reflecting the dim glow like eyes watching the few cars that ventured out. The smell of wet concrete and ozone hung thick in the air. It was the kind of night that felt alive with unseen movement, where every shadow seemed to twitch just a little too deliberately. Daniel Mercer had been driving all evening, making his way back from a last-minute delivery job in the neighboring town. His job was mostly quiet, mostly lonely, and that suited him just fine. He liked the isolation, the chance to think, or not think at all. The roads were mostly empty, and the familiar route home should have offered some comfort. But tonight, there was something different in the air, something that made him grip the steering wheel tighter and glance repeatedly into the rearview mirror. About 30 minutes from home, as he took a curve near the outskirts where the streetlights stopped entirely and the trees leaned close over the road like silent sentinels, he saw something he didn't expect. A figure standing on the shoulder, just barely visible through the sheets of rain. The figure's clothes were dark, soaked, and stuck to its frame. Daniel slowed, squinting through the windshield, uncertain if he was seeing someone or a trick of the rain and shadows. The figure didn't move, didn't wave. It simply stood there, motionless, as if waiting. Daniel's rational mind screamed at him to keep driving, to ignore it, but a small, nagging sense of curiosity, coupled with a sense of responsibility or perhaps fear of a trapped soul, pushed him to stop. He rolled the car to a halt a few feet away from the figure, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The engine idled in the deafening quiet that the rain couldn't quite fill. "Hey," he called, his voice trembling more than he liked. "Do you need a ride?" No answer. Daniel rolled the window down just slightly. The cold, wet wind hit him immediately, slicing through his jacket. The figure remained perfectly still, hood drawn low over its face, making it impossible to see anything. Daniel felt a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. Most people would have panicked by now, but he told himself it was just a hitchhiker, probably cold and terrified. Still, something about the posture, rigid, unnervingly calm, made him pause. "Look, I can take you somewhere safe," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Just get in the car." This time the figure moved, not a step, not a nod, but the hood shifted just enough that Daniel could see a glint of pale skin beneath. That was enough to make his heart start hammering. He unlocked the passenger door, hesitated, then reached for it as the figure approached. The rain dripped off the hood and onto the seat as the figure slid inside, silent. Daniel's hands shook as he adjusted the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of the face. The hood still covered most of it, but the pale skin and dark, dripping hair plastered to the forehead made it look almost like a mask. The figure said nothing, did not even breathe audibly. It simply sat there, still as a statue, staring straight ahead with unblinking eyes. "Where? Where are you headed?" Daniel asked, hoping for any response. Again, nothing. He swallowed hard. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, each drop on the car roof like a hammer. He tried to convince himself it was just the storm, just nerves, but instinct clawed at him, screaming that something was wrong. Deeply, profoundly wrong. He started driving again, slowly, the wipers barely keeping the windshield clear. Each turn in the road seemed to stretch time, each shadow on the roadside stretching and flickering with the movement of the car. The figure remained silent, unchanging. After several minutes of tense, wordless driving, Daniel tried again. Are you okay?" No reaction, but the figure's head tilted slightly. It was so small a movement that it almost went unnoticed, yet it was deliberate, precise. Daniel swallowed. Something about the motion felt intentional, predatory. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe this was someone traumatized, maybe they didn't speak, maybe it was someone he knew. But even the thought made his stomach tighten with dread. Suddenly, the car lurched as the figure reached forward. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, hydroplaned briefly, and he fought to regain control. The figure's hand was on the gear shift, his breath caught in his throat. Panic surged, a raw, visceral terror. He jerked the wheel, swerving the car toward the shoulder. "What the hell? Get your hands off!" he shouted. The figure leaned forward, hood slipping back slightly. And then he saw the face. It was someone he recognized, or at least someone he thought he recognized. Pale, almost translucent in the dim light, eyes hollow, yet fixated with impossible focus. The mouth moved, but not in a normal way, more a rasping, gurgling whisper than speech. "I've been waiting." Daniel's stomach dropped. The name was on the tip of his tongue, impossible yet undeniable, Lena Harrow. She had vanished nearly 10 years ago from this very town. No trace, no investigation that went anywhere. And now, here she was, or what claimed to be her. The rain, the night, the deserted roads, all of it felt like it had condensed into this singular moment of wrongness. He struggled to comprehend, to breathe. The car door on the other side creaked. Lena, or the thing wearing her face, slid out, moving in jerky, deliberate motions. Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering. His mind raced, trying to find an explanation that wasn't insane, that wasn't impossible. The air seemed to thicken, the storm pressing down on him late. Then he heard the noise, a soft, wet rustling in the trees, circling him. Figures, more of them, pale, hollow-eyed, silent, standing just out of reach, forming a perimeter. The rational part of Daniel screamed that he should run, should get out of there, but the mud, slick and deep, caught his feet. Panic made his movements clumsy, desperate. He turned and ran, slipping in the mud, the rain soaking through every layer of clothing, chilling him to the bone. The figures followed, silently, methodically, never breaking stride. Their faces were all familiar, yet wrong. People from his past, missing neighbors, childhood friends, people he'd seen in photos, and then never again. Their eyes were empty, hollow, and fixed entirely on him. He came across a collapsed barn, the remnants of its wooden frame protruding like the skeleton of some giant creature. He darted inside, the darkness swallowing him. He pressed himself against a rotting beam, trying to catch his breath. The figures didn't enter. They never did. They waited outside, like predators, patient and eternal. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt meaningless, warped. The rain beat on the roof, but inside the barn, there was silence apart from the occasional creak of wood or the soft scuff of boots in the mud outside. Daniel felt his mind fraying, memories mixing with nightmares. He remembered small things about Lena, her laugh, the way she'd always carry a notebook, the way she had looked at him once with distrustful eyes. And now those memories were twisted, impossible, haunted. Eventually, desperation won. He had to move, had to escape. He slipped out a broken window, feet sinking into the thick mud. He ran toward the road, toward anything that smelled like life, like normality. The storm had lessened slightly, the rain a constant drizzle now. The wind carried a cold bite, and the trees swayed, whispering with movement. Then he saw a bridge over Ash Creek. He didn't hesitate, though every instinct told him not to. The bridge was narrow, slick with rain, wood rotted in spots. The water below roared, swollen and dark. He stepped onto it carefully, 1 foot at a time. Behind him, the figures emerged from the trees, pale faces glistening, unblinking eyes fixed on him. Halfway across, the bridge groaned. Daniel's heart stopped. A plank cracked underfoot. He stumbled, grabbed the railing, and barely held himself upright. The figures reached the edge, stopping just short of stepping onto the bridge, watching him with impossible patience. Daniel's mind was screaming. Fear had replaced thought. Adrenaline pushed him forward. He made it across, sliding the final few feet into the mud of the opposite bank. He didn't stop, didn't look back, and ran straight into the town, straight into the first building he could find, the old general store, abandoned since the previous winter. He locked the door behind him, pressed his back to it, and slid down to the floor. He was soaked, trembling, utterly broken. For a long while, the only sounds were the faint dripping of water through cracks in the ceiling, the low, distant hum of the storm outside. He thought he was safe. He thought it was over. Then he heard it, a soft tapping, slow, insistent, at the window. His pulse jumped. He looked. Across the street, at the apartment above the bakery, a figure stood in the shadows, hood low, eyes unblinking. The tapping continued, rhythmic, and a whisper, barely audible over the drizzle. "I've been waiting." Daniel's mind shattered. The world around him had dissolved into a nightmare from which he could see no waking. Outside, the rain continued, indifferent, relentless. Story the end.